What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and Kenyon Martin had this really cool question because I was going through the comments for the Thanos Buster idea for Iron Man. For those of you guys who don't know, I usually read comments for about the first hour of a video, and then after that, I just go off and start making other videos, or I just kind of wander off and watch TV or something like that. But I usually watch them for the first hour, and Kenyon Martin had this really cool question. So Kenyon asked, why not have the characters like switch out? So you have like, Iron Man using Thor tech and different things like that, and so on and so forth. And it kind of got me thinking. From Thor Ragnarok, we know that Asgard's been destroyed. Basically, it's like the whole city of Asgard's been totally obliterated. But here's a funny thing. For the non-comic book reader, Asgard can be a little bit confusing. So Asgard is both a city as well as an actual realm. So it's very similar to like New York City, New York, right? Like you could take New York City and move it to Texas, and it would still be New York City if you wanted to call it that, but then you also still have New York State. And so because of that, like Asgard is kind of a cool situation because it's been destroyed. Like in Marvel Comics, it's been totally obliterated before. And the whole idea with this is my thought process is Iron Man could rebuild Asgard. And really, like even like the return of Asgard could happen in a couple different ways. So here's how this whole thing works. And I didn't misspeak. I said Iron Man could rebuild Asgard. That's not an error. Like you guys will find out why here in a second. So with the destruction of Asgard, this was the culmination of something like a 9 or 10 year plan by editor-in-chief Joe Quesada. And the idea was that Marvel had come out of like the 1990s comic bust, and people were just like, okay, we have to like rebuild Marvel Comics from the ground up, basically. We have to give people a reason to give a damn about our characters, because really like everything was struggling from Marvel. Like in the 1990s, like Fantastic Four, Avengers, even the X-Men by the early 2000s. I mean, like everything was struggling across the board because a lot of the writers had bailed out. They'd gone on to form like Image Comics, and there were all these different things that were going on, and the stories just weren't that great. And so when Joe Quesada came on, he brought on guys like Brian Michael Bendis and like this whole era of like new talent that was entering the Marvel landscape. And one of the things that he did is he sat down and he kind of formed like this 10-year plan, this kind of 10-year revolutionary plan to basically revamp Marvel in its entirety. And a lot of things came out of that. For example, like the Avengers Disassembled. That was actually a prelude to the events of House of M, which we'll talk about here in a second. But Avengers Disassembled was basically a story where the Scarlet Witch believed that she had kids and that the Avengers had taken her kids away from her. Marvel's really kind of done crazy thing with her kids. Like at one point they were the shards of like a demon called Mephisto, who's Marvel's version of Satan. And then it turned out they were real, but then it turned out they actually weren't real, and then they were the whole time. And like it gets really weird and wonky when it comes to the kids of Scarlet Witch and Vision. How they had kids, I have no idea. I don't like Vision's a robot, man. So maybe he really is like the total package. I have no idea. But the fact remains here that when it comes to that whole Avengers Disassembled, she basically waged war against the Avengers team, and it was crazy. I mean, she was like a one-woman army. It was nuts. She used her powers while Iron Man was speaking in front of the United Nations, I think it was, to basically make it appear like he was drunk, which meant that like Stark, like the shares of Stark Enterprises just tanked. People just like investors were just selling out left and right, and so because he was losing so much money, he was barely keeping his company afloat, and he couldn't bankroll the Avengers anymore. And because the Avengers didn't have any financing, they couldn't function as a team anymore. So like they all basically broke up. But then it was a slew of other things. Like it was crazy stuff. Like Hawkeye Dies. Jeremy Renner, I'm sorry, man. I love you as Hawkeye, but in the comics, you're not that interesting. Like you're more interesting in the movies than you are in the comics. Jeremy Renner's amazing. And the comics, Hawkeye died, and it was almost kind of laughable. Like the Scarlet Witch basically uses her reality warping powers and manifest this entire Kree armada above Avengers Mansion, and like soldiers come down, like the whole 9 yards. They're just like wrecking everything. And I want to say she does something, and it sends She-Hulk into a tailspin, and she just goes savage and just goes absolutely ballistic. But during the assault on Avengers Mansion, like every Avenger, like anyone who's ever been an Avenger shows up. They have this huge like 2-page splash screen where it's like every Avenger ever is there, except for the ones who are dead. And like in the assault, I want to say that one of Hawkeye's exploding arrows is damaged or something like that, and it's gonna blow up. So he's like, not like this, and he grabs one of the Kree soldiers and takes off into the ship, and then it blows up, and I laughed a little bit when I saw it. But still, like, it was kind of a cool thing. But that goes into the events of House of M, where it's basically like Charles Xavier and Magneto and all these guys, because Scarlet Witch is Magneto's daughter in the comics. They sit down and they're like, okay, this chick's going crazy, and we have to find a way to like keep her in check. And so what ends up happening is like Charles Xavier calls a meeting of the Avengers, the X-Men, and I think some miscellaneous heroes, and they all show up on the mutant island of Genosha, which at one point was like a safe haven for mutants in the Marvel Universe. And Xavier's like, we don't have a choice, we have to kill Scarlet Witch. And like Captain America's like, are you crazy, man? We don't just kill people, we have to find a way to treat her. And Xavier's like, I'm the foremost authority on minds. Hers is broken, she's gonna do something, she's gonna snap, and things are gonna go crazy. Well then, like, while they're all having this debate, Xavier vanishes, and they all go on the hunt for Xavier, and while they're hunting for him, they all start disappearing. And then you end up finding out, like what had happened was like Quicksilver had gone to Scarlet Witch and was like, you can use your powers to make everything perfect. And so she ended up warping reality and basically created a new universe where everybody had everything they wanted. And ultimately they confronted her, they were like, hey, look, you gotta fix this, you know, once they realized what was going on. And so like Magneto goes crazy because Quicksilver was the one that got Scarlet Witch to do it, and Magneto kills his son. Like, dude, it's the coolest thing. There's this amazing point in the story when like Magneto, like, dude, this guy comes, dude, he's like straight out of Crystal Lake, like he's Jason. He just comes walking out and he's like, what have you done in my name, boy? And like Quicksilver starts freaking out, and he was like, you didn't give us a choice. You know, he's like every angsty teenager ever, where he's just like so angry at the world, but no one knows or cares why. And so he's just like he's freaking out, and like Magneto just loses it and just like kills him. And Scarlet Witch is like resurrects him from the dead. And she's like, you're so screwed up, Magneto. Like, you're a terrible father. You know, you wouldn't let me drive the car. Like she's freaking out and goes ballistic. And so she's like, fine. She's like, I'll set things back. And so like she returns things, and right before things go back to normal, she says, no more mutants, and strips 98% of the mutant population of their powers. So everything goes back to normal, and there's only, at least as far as we're aware, 198 mutants left. And it's crazy. Like it's just bonkers stuff. But that was Joe Quesada's way of like toning down and basically reducing the mutant population. And so then you had events like Spider-Man One More Day, which Spider-Man fans still can't get past for reasons I don't understand. And the whole thing is they're like, okay, you know, Peter Parker, it's hard to tell stories about him when he's married because it basically puts an age on him, like it dates him. And so the idea of Quesada was get rid of the marriage, and Spider-Man fans still can't let that go. So ultimately the marriage went away, and then you basically went forward with Peter Parker as we know him now. And Marvel said repeatedly, Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson are never going to get married again. But it was a lot of these big changes that had gone on. But this was the process of going through and just kind of reshuffling the board and changing things up. And so after Avengers Disassembled, you got a new title called New Avengers, which was a whole new Avengers roster, like Spider-Man, Wolverine, Iron Man, Captain America, a handful of others. It was pretty cool for what it was. The Purple Man came back in the first story arc, which was amazeballs. Dude, Purple Man was, dude, it was amazing. It was pretty awesome. Purple Man in the show, I think, is more interesting than he is in the comics, but I digress terribly. So because of this, what you ended up having is you had a whole host of events that went on. Like you had Civil War, you had Secret Invasion, you had Fear itself. You had a lot of these stories that were taking place around that time. The three most important, and the ones that like set the stage for this whole idea of Asgard and everything, some 8 minutes into this video, is what you had Civil War, you had Secret Invasion, and then you had Dark Reign. So Civil War, as most everybody knows, is the superhero Civil War, where they all fight each other over superhuman registration. At the end of Civil War, the bad guys win, basically. Registration goes through, and superheroes have to register their identities, their powers, the whole 9 yards, with the federal government. Following that came a story called Secret Invasion, and what you learned was that the Skrull race, a shape-shifting race of aliens, had been systematically replacing humans and superheroes, and when everybody found out about it, it led to like this massive war. And so at the end of Secret Invasion, what happened was the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, had intercepted information that would have won the war, and he used that information and did win the war. And so the result was that the federal government sat down and they said the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't know about this under the direction of Tony Stark as the director director of S.H.I.E.L.D., he's completely inept. So they fire Tony Stark and they replace him with the Green Goblin. And because the Green Goblin is a villain, he does what villains do. And so he basically disassembles S.H.I.E.L.D. in its entirety, replaces it with Hammer, and then starts this huge campaign to basically conquer North America. And so when this happens, like a whole bunch of things take place, but it all happens under the branding of Dark Reign, in the sense that Dark Reign's not really a story per se. It's not like Dark Reign parts 1, 2, and 3, and 4. It's a way to shuffle things around. All the Avengers basically went underground. The X-Men left the United States, took up residence in Utopia, which is an island off the coast of San Francisco. All kinds of things were going on in this. What you had is you basically had Asgard that existed in Broxton, Oklahoma. And the reason why was because prior to the events of Civil War, Thor had basically died. Like at the time the story was written, he was dead. Like he was gone and out of the picture, and that was the end of him. What ends up happening is during the events of Civil War, Tony Stark clones Thor, and they literally call it Ragnarok. And so this clone goes crazy, it goes awry, it kills like Goliath, who's part of the superhero community, and they end up shutting it down, and then they fix it, and then they bring it back. But the whole thing was, after the events of Civil War were over, Thor basically returned, and he basically rebuilt Asgard in Broxton, Oklahoma. He traveled around the world, discovering the essences of the Asgardian spirits in human form, releasing them, and then bringing the Asgardians back. But when he shows up, Iron Man's like, hey man, like you have to register. Like you really need to register here because I'm the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and you can't tell me what to do anymore. Dude, what follows, like in this conversation between Thor and Iron Man, what follows, and part of my language here, is one of the greatest ass kickings in the history of comics. Oh, dude, it's amazing. It's the funniest thing ever. Yeah, because Iron Man's like, man, you can't tell me what to do, Thor. Like, Chris Hemsworth, if you ever see this video, man, I really hope they do this in the MCU. Iron Man's like, dude, you can't tell me what to do, Thor. Like, I'm the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. I've got the full might of like America's military force at my disposal. And Thor's like, don't give a damn, and like just wrecks him, just absolutely destroys him with his hammer. It's not even a fight. It's more like Thor pounding on Iron Man like a side of beef until he gets tired. And like he's talking like the best trash talk ever. He's like, look, man, like you may have your little suit and that's cool, but that's all you are. You're a man in a metal suit. I'm a god. And it's the beastliest thing. It's the coolest thing ever. And so at the end of it, Iron Man's like, yeah, man, you have helped me to understand the error of my ways. We can find a resolution here. But that's one of the ways that they could redo Asgard, is basically have Thor rebuild it in Broxton, Oklahoma. I personally don't really think they'll go that route. I don't really think they'll do that. Or at least I don't really want to see them do that. What I want to see them do is have Iron Man rebuild Asgard. And the reason for this is because as part of that Dark Reign branding initiative, when Norman Osborn was trying to conquer the United States, you had a story called Siege on Asgard, which is one of the coolest stories ever. What had happened is Norman Osborn had looked at Asgard and realized there was all this magic and all this power that was there. I mean, all the various weapons that were available at their disposal in the whole 9 yards, it was all pretty cool. And it was easy for them to, they could access it, attain it, and then use it for their own ends. So like further their campaigns. And so Norman Osborn, alongside the Dark Avengers, traveled to Asgard and invaded it, and literally launched an attack against it. Thor wasn't there at the time because he was traveling around the rest of the world, finding the Asgardian essences and so on and so forth. He shows up like halfway through the battle. But what ends up going on here is you have like a whole bunch of things that go nuts, like Loki dies, and it's crazy stuff, But then you have Robert Reynolds, the Sentry, who just like destroys Asgard. I'm pretty sure it's Robert Reynolds, who like just levels all of Asgard. And it's just like, damn, it goes bonkers, like it goes absolutely crazy. But from there, following the events of Siege on Asgard and really like the conclusion of the whole Dark Reign branding initiative, this huge, 10-year long era, I guess, epic by Joe Quesada to revamp Marvel, you go into what's called the Heroic Age. And that happened around 2010, 2011. And it was really just like the heroes just rediscovering what it means to be a hero and, that kind of good stuff. They're like, we lost our way with Civil War, yada, yada, yada. And so what happens is Iron Man pairs up with Thor and rebuilds Asgard. But instead of it being Asgard, it's just called Asgardia. And so what you basically have in Marvel, at least from that point, running all the way up until now, is you have two Asgards. You have what's called Old Asgard, which is the Asgard that was destroyed during Siege, that was teleported to the Asgardian dimension by Odin. And then you have Asgardia, which is a rebuilt version of Asgard using Stark tech that initially orbited the moon, and I think now it orbits Saturn. But that I think would be kind of cool to see like, the aftermath, whether it's, at the end of Avengers 4, that seems more like a phase 4 kind of thing. Like if Asgard, if they decide to rebuild it, it would seem like with everything going on, it would be very out of place for Thor to be like, hold on, wait everybody, I know the universe is going to pot, but I really want to rebuild Asgard, so I'll be over here while that's happening. Like I have a hard time believing that's going to happen. I mean, you know, it's definitely going to go from like a story into a conflict, and so this seems more like a Phase 4 or an Avengers 4 aftermath kind of thing. But, you know, having Tony Stark pair up with Thor, rebuild Asgard using Stark tech, and then either keep it on Earth, send it out, you know, over, you know, near the moon or something like that, I think works. And I think it actually has a pretty cool effect. But again, it's just kind of a theory that I'm just sort of throwing out here. With the MCU, you don't know what direction they're going to go in. If they're going to adapt from the comics, I mean, we know that they're not trying to retell the comics in film form, which I'm glad they're not, because if they did, I would be like, this is boring, because I already know what happens here. It's cool to see it in a film, but I wouldn't nearly be as interested in the MCU if they just retold comic book stories that I've already read. And so with them kind of shifting things up a little bit and changing things around, it is cool, and it really does work pretty effectively. So anyway, that's just kind of my theory that I'm throwing out here, and I'm curious what you guys think. You know, the idea of Iron Man rebuilding Asgard. Do you think it's something that would be kind of cool, or do you think it's a little too far-fetched? Because I also admit it might be a little too far-fetched to have Iron Man rebuild Asgard using Stark tech. I don't know. I mean, I think it'd be kind of a cool idea. But if you're new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.